December 16th, 533 AD, the Digest and the Institutes. I talk about Emperor Justinian a lot, and his famous general Belisarius. They are known for military campaigns to expand the empire. Justinian also did a fair bit domestically too. One thing he did 5 years into his reign were the publication of the Digest and the Institutes. The Digest was a large collection of legal writings, and the Institutes were effectively a textbook for law school students. Consolidating Roman law, of course the Byzantine Empire is the Eastern Roman Empire, and simplifying the day-to-day lives of people in core Byzantine territory. December 16th, 755 AD, this is the beginning of the An Lushan Rebellion in China. This was a large-scale rebellion against the Tang dynasty led by this guy. His name, of course, is An Lushan. And the result was millions of people killed for the sake of putting down this revolt. December 16th, the year 1431. Who has read up on their 100 Years' War history? This is the day that Henry VI of England is crowned King of France inside Notre Dame Cathedral. Now, of course, we know that England and France were not a unified kingdom for the several hundred years after this. So what happened? What was this? You can think of this as an attempt by the English to manifest control over France that they didn't have completely in reality. They had a legal claim to the French throne after the Treaty of Troyes. That was 11 years before this. At the same time, this was shortly after Joan of Arc's time. This was a time when French leadership was getting stronger. The French were gaining morale in this 100 Years' War that lasted 116 years. The English in France were losing ground, losing morale, but at least they had Paris still, and they had this 10-year-old treaty. So they made this symbolic gesture, grasping at any straw they could get. December 16th, 1497, this is Vasco da Gama. He was a Portuguese explorer, and his claim to fame was finding an ocean route between Europe and India. India had a lot of exotic products that the Europeans liked. However, the standard way to get there over land happened to lead through a lot of the Muslim kingdoms, and there was a little thing called the Arab slave trade going on. Maybe you've heard of it. Traveling in a trade caravan overland through the Middle East was not a lot of people's first choice. So on this day in 1497, Vasco da Gama passed by the Great Fish River in South Africa. This was the point where explorers before him had turned back and gone home. This guy, however, pressed on and successfully mapped out a trade route by sea. December 16th, 1594, the death of Alison Balfour, or Margaret Balfour. This is, in fact, one of the most well-known Scottish witchcraft trials. This happened in the Orkney Islands. Balfour was arrested, interrogated. And what do you think that interrogation looked like? Hint, hint, it involved a lot of hot iron. And not only her, they also tortured her husband, her son, and her 7-year-old daughter. She ultimately wrote a confession under heavy duress, and just before her execution on the 16th, she proclaimed her innocence and announced to the public all the methods of torture used against her and her family. December 16th, 1598, the Battle of Noryang. This was the final battle of the 7-Year War. Not the 7 Years' War, that was a Europe and North America thing. The 7-Year War in Asia, also known as the Imjin War. Some consider it 2 wars with a truce in the middle. This was one of multiple Japanese attempts to invade Korea over the centuries, but this time the combined forces of Korea and China were able to defend that peninsula. And the Battle of Noryang was the final battle during this war. The Koreans defending their home, though, was not a done deal, not a sure thing, not an easy win. This was in fact also the war where Admiral Yi Sun-shin of Korea used his turtle ship to win some great naval victories against some pretty bad odds. December 16th, 1598, speaking of the Battle of Noryang and Admiral Yi, this is also the date of death for Yi Sun-shin. Although this was the final battle of the war, the day that they won the war, this was also the day that their famous admiral died. He was hit by a stray bullet while commanding ships. And one of his last orders was to keep his death a secret so as not to cause panic on their side and lower morale. And so passed one of the greatest heroes of Korean military history. December 16th, 1653, Oliver Cromwell becomes Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland. This was part of a complicated time for England and the UK in general. In 1649, they actually executed their king, Charles I of the House of Stuart, for treason in London. And that left them with about an 11-year period where instead of monarchy, they decided to try out this thing called a republic. Now keep in mind, this was before the American Revolution, before the French Revolution, before even a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers wrote their stuff. Cromwell would eventually die of disease at the age of 59 a few years later in 1658. The Stuart dynasty, namely King Charles II, would come back in 1660, and that family of monarchs would last at least for a few more decades until the Glorious Revolution. December 16th, 1689, the English Bill of Rights is adopted. Most people know of the American Bill of Rights, while England has one too. This was following shortly after their Glorious Revolution, where they deposed one family of monarchs in favor of another. During that time, though, the English Parliament convened and made some important decisions. One of them was this: government may not levy taxes without the consent of Parliament. Excessive bail and many other things were covered in this Bill of Rights. December 16th, 1773, the Boston Tea Party. This was in the lead up to the American Revolution. The British government had a few years earlier finished up the French and Indian War as it's known in the Americas, and the 7 Years' War as it's known in Europe. The people in England were of the mind that they had provided both people and money for equipment for armies to defend the American colonies against both the French and the Indians. And so the government of England was rather enthusiastic to tax the colonies. Taxes went up, people were unhappy, and one of those taxes was a tax on tea. The people of Boston did not like this. And so one fateful night, a bunch of people from a group called the Sons of Liberty dressed themselves up disguised as Mohawk Indians, went aboard one of the ships in the harbor that was carrying tea which had been taxed by the crown, and threw the tea overboard into the sea. This event will be celebrated by American patriots for a long, long time to come. December 16th, 1777. This is still during the American Revolution. American independence is far from certain, although the Declaration of Independence had been put out more than a year before this. The war was very much ongoing. The British had not lost yet. But people on the American side were already thinking about what form of government they would adopt once the war was over, assuming they won. They came up with the Articles of Confederation. And the people who came up with this disliked monarchy and strong central authority so much that they made a form of government where the federal power was blatantly defanged, had not enough power to govern. The states had all the authority to the point where they could even print their own money and have small wars with each other over land disputes. In another universe, we could have been more like the European Union. On this day, Virginia was the first state to ratify this form of government. However, years after the war in 1787, America held a constitutional convention and came up with the Constitution that we use. December 16th, 1782, the Muharram Rebellion in India against the British East India Company. You may have heard the phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire." India was one of the places that made this true. The British controlled ocean trade going in and out of India for a very long time, and also did a lot of government administration on the subcontinent. The Muharram Rebellion was one of the first big rebellions against the British. However, the British would not leave India until more than a century and a half later with Mohandas Gandhi. December 16th, 1826, Benjamin Edwards declares himself the head of state for the Republic of Fredonia. The Fredonian Rebellion was an early attempt of the people of Texas to secede from Mexico. You see, back in the day, Mexico controlled Texas, but all throughout the first half of the 19th century, without the British being around to restrict frontier settlement, American settlers kept coming and coming and coming. The government of Mexico could not control the number of English speakers moving into Texas. They did not match the language or the culture of the rest of the nation, and the Mexicans did not like this. Can relate. The Republic of Fredonia and the Fredonian Rebellion was an early attempt to rectify this by the English speakers simply declaring themselves independent and trying to go their own way. This one did not work. It would not be until the Texas Revolution 9 years later that Texas finally got independence from Mexico. December 16th, 1838, the Battle of Blood River. This happened when a group of Boers who were descendants of the original Dutch settlers of South Africa wanted to get away from British-controlled Cape Colony and go further north into African land. This group of a few hundred, known as the Voortrekkers, ran across a very large army of the Zulu Africans. The Zulus did not like this. So what the group of around 600 did is they arranged their wagons in a circle pattern. It worked for the Hussites a few hundred years before this, and it worked here, beautifully in fact. Despite being outnumbered by multiple tens of thousands, the Zulus tried again and again and again to break through the wagon fort. But they could not do it. The Boers fought them off every single time, and furthermore, the Boers only suffered 3, count them, 1, 2, 3, wounded, not even dead, while the Zulu dead numbered more than 3,000. The Zulus eventually gave up and left the Boers to go on their way. December 16th, 1850. This is the day that 2 ships, namely the Charlotte Jane and the Randolph, bring the first of the Canterbury Pilgrims to New Zealand. This is a group from England who went and left everything they had to go and settle in a new place, and they would go on to grow the nation of New Zealand into what it is today. December 1759, this is the date of death for Wilhelm Grimm. If you've ever heard of the Grimm Brothers fairy tales, well, yes, this is one of the Grimm Brothers. For such stories as Hansel and Gretel, as well as Little Red Riding Hood. Although Little Red Riding Hood was an older story than the Grimm Brothers, they are the ones who wrote down the version that we most commonly read today. Brother Jacob would go on to live until 1865. December 16th, 1863, this is General Joseph E. Johnston. And on this day, Confederate President Jefferson Davis appointed Johnston as Supreme Commander of the Army of Tennessee, replacing General Bragg. December 16th, 1880, this was the beginning of the First Boer War. The British had a very big financial interest in controlling South Africa, and had established a colony there for multiple decades. The only thing was, there were quite a lot of descendants of the original Dutch settlers in that land, who the British had sort of an off-and-on relationship with. And on this day, they officially began a War of Independence. December 16th, 1898, this is the date of death for Pavel Tretyakov. He was a famous art collector and philanthropist from Russia. He was alive during the time of the Russian realist art genre that I've talked about a lot. This painting of him, in fact, was done by Ilya Repin. So prolific was he in collecting art that his personal collection formed the basis for the most famous art gallery in Russia, that is the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, which is still around today. December 16th, 1944, the Battle of the Bulge would begin, when Germany launched a big counteroffensive after they had been losing a lot of land on their western front. Pushing into France in the middle of winter, they were able to retake territory in most places, but not all. There was one group of mostly American troops that dug in and did not give up their land. While going along the line, troops to the left and right of them fell back, resulting in the Germans enveloping them on multiple sides. This state of affairs, with the Americans being surrounded, lasted more than a month. When the Germans asked the American commander to surrender, they received a one-word reply. That word was nuts. Ultimately, with the Western Allies pushing back and the Eastern Front beginning to heat up again, the German army ran out of steam and were forced to continue their gradual retreat. December 16th, 1968, this is the day that the Alhambra Decree in Spain was reversed. For those not in the know, this is the decree from 1492 that expelled the Jews from Spain. During medieval times, they had hundreds of years of Reconquista, and then they had the Inquisitions. Not only did they target Muslims, but Jews and church reformers likewise did not do well during that time. And as a matter of fact, Jews previously had done relatively well in Muslim-controlled Spain. But New Year, New Us, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and they kicked out the Jews. And now, in 1968, the Catholic Church was saying, sorry, and they officially took this decree off the books. December 16th, 1971, Pakistan surrenders to India, and the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971 comes to an end. This short-lived war lasted only about 2 weeks, and it even began with Pakistan launching surprise attack airstrikes, so in 2 weeks they lost the momentum there. One of the primary causes for the war was a war for independence in Bangladesh. That is a nation to the east of India, sometimes called East Pakistan because of the association. The region of Kashmir, by the way, between India and Pakistan is still disputed to this day, and even China is getting in on that land claim action too. And if you want to see something funny, look up the performances that the border guards give at the India-Pakistan border nearly every day. December 16th, 1980, this is the date of death for Colonel Sanders. Yes, the famous Colonel of KFC. His birth name was Harlan David Sanders. He died in Kentucky at the ripe old age of 90. December 16th, 1980, this is the date of death for Helmut Walter. He was a German engineer. He was born in the year 1900. He was a German engineer, literal rocket scientist. He did a lot of work on plane engine design, including a lot of things that were used by the Germans in World War II. December 16th, 1989, the Romanian Revolution. This was the beginning of a series of quick events leading to Romania changing its government. To put it bluntly, they put their communist leader on trial and gave him and his wife an execution. The 16th is the day that this uprising began, and the end of it would also mark the end of 42 years of communist government in Romania. Wider picture between 1989 and 91, a lot of Eastern Bloc countries rose up against their communist leaders, creating sort of a domino effect, leading to the toppling of the USSR and the reforming of the Russian government into a different form of government. All the Eastern European countries that the Soviets had had under their thumb since World War II had collectively decided this is enough. The Iron Curtain was drawn back, the Berlin Wall fell, and a new era in global diplomacy started. December 16th, 1989, this is the date of death for Lee Van Cleef, or Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr. He was an actor who had big roles in a lot of spaghetti western movies, including big ones like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Worth watching sometime if you haven't already. December 16th, 1997, Denno Senshi Porygon. I don't know Japanese, and I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. This occurred during Season 1, Episode 38, the original air date of the Pokemon series. When this episode aired in Japan, there was a clip from it that had a lot of flashing lights, and more than 600 kids were reported to have had seizures because of this. Following this event, that particular episode has not been aired in any country. December 16, 2005, this is the date of death for John Spencer, best known for his role in the West Wing TV series. December 16, 2007, this is the date of death for Dan Fogelberg. He's an American singer. You probably hear his song Same Old Lang Syne every Christmas season. He died in Maine at the age of 56.